Hello, and welcome to this Rain Taxi virtual event. I'm Eric Lorber, the director of Rain Taxi. If you don't know about us, we are a nonprofit organization that champions aesthetically adventurous literature. Our work revolves around a quarterly magazine of critical writing. Our new spring issue is out, and if you'd like to have it, check our website anytime after this event. See if you might be interested in getting a copy or in joining us as a member. Another way we advocate for literature is through events like this one. This one, like many, is free to attend, but if you're able to pitch in, feel free to use the donate button at the bottom of your screen. We're privileged to receive funding from places like the National Endowment for the Arts and the Minnesota State Arts Board, but our most vital support comes from individuals like you. Lots of other ways you can participate with us today. There's the chat function on your screen. Keep those observations coming. If you have a question, you can put that in the Ask a Question box, and we'll try to get to those at toward the end of the presentation. And then finally, you can buy the book by using that button on your screen. Here it is, The Stringer. And if you hit that button, you'll be taken right to the ordering page for this at our partner bookseller, Majors & Quinn in Minneapolis. If there are other books you want to buy while you're over there, go ahead. Any book you buy using that link does help support our series. I'll say a little bit more about book buying later in the program, but now it's my pleasure to welcome Ted Rall, and we'll hopefully be joined soon by Pablo Callejo. Pablo is coming to us from Luxembourg, and we're having a connection problem now that we hope will be resolved momentarily. Meanwhile, we're speaking with Ted, again, the author of The Stringer. Ted Rall, I'm sure so many of you know, is the extremely prolific author of so many books and graphic novels. They range from editorial cartooning to biographies, reportage, travel journalism, and this book is a work of fiction. So Ted, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Eric.
And I gave that very cursory overview of your work, but I wanted to start today by asking you to maybe reframe that trajectory, because I really am awed by the not only the prolific nature of the work, but how many different genres actually that you work in. How do you describe your arc as a creator over these past few decades?
Well, I think I started, and I'm probably better known as a political editorial cartoonist for daily newspapers and alternative weeklies. I sort of emerged in the early 1990s alongside people like Tom Tomorrow and Reuben Bowling, who did Tom the Dancing Bug. And then I started moving into graphic novels in the mid-90s. I did my first one called Real Americans Admit the Worst Thing I've Ever Done. And then I did My War with Brian, which was sort of pretty well received. And that encouraged me to do more. And it was an exciting, expanding form. And I started moving into prose as well. I started my syndicated column in the 90s, and then started doing other stuff, political polemics. I've done graphic novel biographies, and probably the format I'm sort of most comfortable in is sort of books that are sort of half prose, half cartoons. And that used to be a really incredibly common format, like, Thurber and Bill Malden, who did Willie and Joe during World War II. They all worked in that format. That was like really standard. Robert Benchley, people like that. And then it sort of went away in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. It's almost like people forgot that cartoonists often knew how to write also. And so in 1996, I put out a book called Revenge of the Latchkey Kids, which some people might remember as sort of a Generation X screed. And that kind of, so some people know me from that. So graphic novelist, writer, cartoonist, illustrator. I do a lot of things, maybe none of them well, but I do a lot of things.
One thing you haven't mentioned, and that I so often associate with your work, is its journalistic bent. And you've actually received awards for journalism. Do you have training in that, or is it just a where you're drawn to kind of report on the world?
I'm self-taught as an artist, which is pretty obvious from my drawing. Part of the reason that I had Pablo Callejo do the drawings for this book. But yeah, I'm self-taught as a writer as well, and but I do have sort of the normal trajectory for someone from my generation to becoming a journalist. I'm 57 years old, and most people my age and older wouldn't have gone to journalism school, even if they ended up at a major newspaper or magazine. And, basically I've been working in newspapers since I was 15 years old, when I was first published by the Kettering Oakwood Times. And, doing cartoons never seemed quite enough. I always had an interest in doing opinion writing and straight journalism. And the only problem with straight journalism for me, and the reason I never pursued it, is because I really don't like assignments. I don't like, hey, we have this idea, we'd like you to go down to City Hall and cover this meeting or whatever. It's really important work, but it just never really interested me. I only wanted to work on stuff that I thought was interesting to me. So I've been lucky enough to be able to put a career together that allowed me to do that.
And you've actually alluded to this a little bit already, but say a little more if you can. How do you decide when your own art style isn't right for a project, when it's going to be a collaboration?
Well, I've only done 2 collaborations really, artistically, and both of them were with Pablo. My publisher, Terry Nantier from NBM, first suggested that I might want to collaborate with an artist back in 2007 when I started working on Year of Loving Dangerously, which was a graphic novel memoir about the year after which I was expelled from college and sort of ended up on the streets of New York living by the seat of my pants. And basically, not to give too much away, I ended up sleeping with a lot of women in order to have a place to stay. And there's a lot of sex scenes in this book. And I knew myself that nobody, especially me, wanted to see my drawings of sex scenes. My style wasn't appropriate for it. I knew that it wouldn't be appealing. It wouldn't look good. It would just not work. So, I could have tried it. I think it just would have been like the oddest, weirdest thing in the world. I couldn't imagine it. So anyway, so Terry mentioned, Pablo, who had done Bluesman, which was a very well-received, very cool graphic novel that he did with Rob Vollmer. And so when I saw his work and Pablo expressed willingness to work on this, I was incredibly excited. And so, we started. It was almost crazy because Pablo was in Spain at the time. He is Spanish. And we were the way we were collaborating just by email and by me doing submitting scripts, and then it was almost like he could read my mind. I felt like what I envisioned he was able to put on the page in this, like, it was an amazing experience. And it was his ability to convey New York in the bad old 1980s. He'd never even been to New York City at all, much less in the 80s, but he made it work great. So anyway, the point is, to answer your question, I just sort of, I used to park in a parking garage that had a big sign in it that said, "Know your level," and it's really good. It's good advice for life, and,
Absolutely.
I know what I'm able to do and I know what I'm not able to do. And so, artistically, I can, I think I can convey, for example, the bleakness of Afghanistan pretty well with my style. And I did that into Afghanistan and Back, which is also for NBM and did very well. I don't think that for a globe-trotting story like The Stringer, where you need to be able to really show like, hey, I'm in Kyrgyzstan. Hey, I'm in the Transnistria. Hey, I'm in Kurdistan. Hey, I'm in Saudi Arabia. These are all very different looking places, and they need to look distinctively different. And you have to have a real sense of place when you see these images. Otherwise, you're not going to have the ability to follow what is a pretty complex story. And so there was never any doubt in my mind that I would never be able to do this particular book without a really good artist, and I really knew I needed Pablo.
That's great. So many good insights there, and I would add too that I feel that Pablo, being a European artist, adds so much to the international importance of the scope of the story, but also the relevance of the story. And as well, the wonderful publisher NBM excels at comics as an international literary form. So again, to our audience, we're hoping to get Pablo's connection problem resolved and get him on the line for this conversation. And we'll be looking at some of the art images soon as well, so hang tight. But meanwhile, Ted, you've set us up perfectly to go a little bit more into the story of the stringer. And I want to say that, yeah, Pablo is such a good choice for the art here, because to me, the story revolves around this central figure that is a really enigmatic character. We're not really sure how to feel about him. He's kind of both the hero and the villain. And so it's so important to have a kind of emotional resonance, to have the art really help nuance that for the reader as the story continues. But I wonder if we could start there with your central character, and tell us how you how you came up with this complicated guy.
Well, so Mark Scribner is a washed-up war correspondent for television, of the kind that wouldn't have had a bold-faced name, the kind of person you'd see on CNN, but whose name you might forget, reporting from places like Bosnia or Afghanistan or Iraq. And he came out of and as we see in flashbacks, newspapering in print, and he's watched that whole world sort of start to crumble financially and then ethically, and ultimately the journalists are paying the highest price, and the public isn't getting the truth. And he's getting increasingly bitter and cynical for a variety of reasons that also have to do with events in his personal life. But there's no doubt that he's kind of a stand-in for what's happening to journalism in general. And so he sort of doesn't, there's basically kind of two ways to respond to being a victim. I mean, I've known lots of writers and cartoonists who've lost their jobs in the bloodbath that has cost tens of thousands of journalism jobs in the last 20 years. I knew a guy who was a great columnist based in New Jersey who basically just took his lumps. He just, lost his job, and then I sort of didn't know what happened to him, and he was just working out of his house and living off his wife's salary and blogging, and that's it. He went quietly into that good night. Other people, are trying valiantly to make it work on social media. But I kept thinking, I was thinking about like what would you do if you didn't have that kind of personality? If you were like a never say die kind of person? And sort of two things came together for me. First of all, in 2010, I went to Afghanistan for the Los Angeles Times. And I was sitting in a guest house in Kabul that used to be, it was called the Gandamak Lodge, and used to be owned by Osama bin Laden, of all people. And it was this very strange scene where you were completely behind blast walls and protected with Afghan servants. It felt like the British Raj. And in fact, it was run by an old Brit who had like British cannons and all this sort of ephemera relating to the 1839 to 1842 First Afghan War. And anyway, so, we're hanging out with like journalists from Al Jazeera, there's journalists from all over the world, but they're also contractors, which is a euphemism for basically paid assassins. There's also NGO workers and just all sorts of riffraff coming in and out of this place. And, I was just thinking, God, as I was collecting contacts, I thought, like, what a resume. I mean, what a Rolodex you end up with in a place like this. You end up with, names for literally for warlords and their commanders. You meet CIA agents. You meet, and who are pretty clear about it. You meet arms dealers. You meet journalists. You meet everybody involved in the business of war. And war is big business, as everybody knows. And so I was thinking, that was kind of rattling around in the back of my head. And when I was, and then the thing that kind of came together for me was that kind of brought me to Mark's story and Mark as a character was just one too many layoffs. And then I was watching Breaking Bad, and I thought, it's like, what if you had like a journalistic equivalent of Walter White, someone who's just is a journalist who uses these contacts to try to not accept going gently into that good night, but decides to go out with a howl, or maybe profiteer from it and build an empire. So that's Mark's motivation. That's who he is, and he has a dark soul, but he's fundamentally not a terrible. He's not pure evil, but he does some pretty evil things, and so it's kind of like Breaking Bad meets journalism, and it's also kind of a love letter in a backhanded way to what journalism used to be about. And I think people could criticize and say, well, journalism isn't about this like macho sort of noir, hyper masculinized vision of going out and tramping around the world and being parachuted into war zones and finding glory in reporting the bloodshed and the mayhem. And that's true. That's not what most journalism is. But it is what war correspondency often is for the people who get involved in it. I mean, make no mistake. I mean, these are people who they know they can die. And I've known quite a few of them who really did have a death wish. I mean, they didn't care about their personal safety, because rather than blow their own brains out, they would rather go out and report it and report from a war zone and have a stray bullet hit them while they're out there. So there is this, it's a very real phenomenon. It's a motivating force for a lot of people who go out and report from conflicts. Yeah, they want to report the truth. They care about the truth. They're willing to take risks. They're brave. But also, there's a lot of blood and guts involved.
Right. Let's stick with the journalism theme for a second, because it's so relevant today. Obviously, we seeing in the same page of the newspaper that legitimate journalists are being assaulted by police, and at the same time rioters are asking for journalistic credentials. It's a topsy-turvy environment, and a huge reminder that our government doesn't function without a free press. Let's look at the title, because that this is a term from journalism, and it's an interesting title for the book, because I certainly, my first time through, said, wow, is this a hint as to who Mark really is deep down? But I wonder if you can tell the audience what this means and unpack why you chose that as the title. Yeah.
So it's a double entendre, or maybe a triple entendre. So a stringer in journalism is usually a very a novice reporter who doesn't get bylined and is sent out to the scene of a story just to collect quotes. So, for example, there's a fire, and the real reporter doesn't go to the scene. He or she is sitting in a newsroom, and so the stringer goes out, talks to people who witnessed the fire, or perhaps to the survivors, writes down the quotes, calls them in, and then, Betty Johnson said blah, blah, blah. And so these quotes make their way into the story. And this used to be very necessary in journalism because of technology, right? I mean, like now you could go to the scene yourself, write the story and email it to your editor and have it and have it get out on time. But back in the day, that wasn't true. There'd have to be let's say you had a 6 p.m. deadline and you go out to cover a story at 3 p.m. Well, you can't be out collecting quotes and then writing the piece up on a typewriter and then getting it put into and getting it typeset and then having it engraved on a plate and printed on time. It just wouldn't happen. So the stringer served that purpose. And, I thought of Marx as a guy who's sort of hanging by a thread and, of course, strung out because he's a man under tremendous pressure. He's either going to go crazy or he's going to lose everything or maybe both.
Right. Thank you for that. And hello, Pablo.
Hi.
Yes.
Hello. I'm really sorry. I please let me apologize, but I have had an unexpected family urgency last minute, and I couldn't connect with it before. I'm really, really sorry. I apologize with all people who are watching us. Sorry.
Thank you. No problem. We're happy you're here. Yeah. And Ted and I have been singing your praises, and so we'll continue to do so. But let me just wrap up a little theme while you get settled in here as well, because we've been talking about the story of the book and the nature of the book, some of its inherent themes, but also I was just going to pivot to kind of the form of it, and Ted, you've already brought up the one of the very key tropes of Walter White. And I think that is such a good example of where this story goes, because I found it almost surprising that for a work that had such substantive things to say about the state of journalism and the some very real practices in the world that you've already been describing, it also has these elements of a kind of thriller and also a kind of satire. And so I just wonder if you can talk about choosing that direction, because it's surprising that those elements come so forward in the tone.
Well, whenever I think of dire circumstances, maybe because I'm half French, I always think of black humor and dark satire. What's happened to journalism is kind of absurd, and in such a short amount of time, it's no one doubts its importance, and somehow we just can't figure out how to pay people for it, so it just stops happening. Like, what the hell? It's like, it reminds me of it's like we're going into the digital dark ages. It's like when you visit the Roman baths and they say, it's like, well, what happened to them? Oh, people just forgot how to clean the silt. What? The people just became stupid in the 5th century. You're like, why? Like, that's us now. We just sort of forgot how to do journalism. And so to me, it seemed pretty natural, once you had like the hard-boiled character of Mark Scribner, that you'd want to place him in a very sort of noir, sort of hilarious, sort of double indemnity type vibe. One of my favorite films is Ace in the Hole, also called The Big Carnival. It's a 1950 Billy Wilder film that has been described as the most cynical film ever made in the United States. It's certainly one of the top ones. And it's about a journalist played by Kirk Douglas, who is down and out alcoholic, who stumbles into a big story, sort of kid falls down well, sort of, and takes advantage of it and milks it for all it's worth and tries to find fame and fortune. And I thought, like, this is kind of like the vibe I want. And I really wanted to go to the nth degree. I wanted to sort of really put the needle to 11, because there's always, in American writing and comics, except for superheroes, where everything is at 11, it's like generally there's sort of this restraint always present, right? I mean, that's our culture. We always kind of like pull back a little bit. Marshall McLuhan would say we're a cool culture, I think. I was like, fuck that. I want to really go like totally, 150 miles an hour. Who cares if you run into a wall? Let's just see what happens. And so that's kind of like why it went that direction. And I think it works in large part because of Pablo's ability to keep the story moving like constantly through the way that he interpreted my text.
Exactly, and that's the perfect segue to bring you in, Pablo. How did you make decisions about the art with all those balls in the air? The realism of the locations, the growing absurdism of the script or the storyline, the film noir element. How did you decide how to approach to visualize Ted's script?
Well, first thing was the style for the whole story, because maybe if somebody has the opportunity of reading our previous book, it was a very, very different style, and still very, very different from my first book, Bluesman, with Rob Palmer. I am always searching for a new style, for a different thing. So we discussed about it, and at the moment I was trying a style more in a European line, we could say, like French, Belgian style. So we decided that it could fit with the story and with the necessities of the story, being at the same time dramatical and satirical, as you said, with that. So that was the decision. About the many places where the action is settled, and I am, as I said in an entry in our publisher's blog, I am a maniac of documentation and realism. As far as I can, there is always something that you can reach, but it's funny to work with Ted because his script is always full of small details. I am in this place, you can see this and that, and the way he places the situation gives me a lot of information about what should I search for to give realism to the. So if you make in both books we have worked in, if you make a slow reading after the first reading, if you make a second reading, just trying to find those small details, you can have a good time, I hope, because there is a lot of work behind a simple panel. A lot of work of documentation, realism, with what kind of cars are used as a taxi in Afghanistan, what kind of uniform wear the police in Kazakhstan, something like that.
Absolutely. And you have perfectly set up the next segment of our talk, which is to take a look together at how you approached the art for some of this. So I know that you're going to walk us through some pages, and we're starting here with a page of script. And so, yeah, go ahead and tell us what your process is like as we look at these pages. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, as you can see, Ted has started with a 4 panels structure, but I wasn't comfortable in giving all the information in just 4 panels. I was having some problem on it, so I changed it to 7 panels. Fortunately for me, Ted is very flexible on this, so I can make any changes to be more comfortable, and he never disagrees. So thank you, Ted. So this was the
never get in the way of a good artist.
If you go back, we can see I started with a small draw on the right side of the page. I always do a small draw. It's almost only me can understand it because it's a first sketch. And yes, it was evident that I wasn't able to do it in 4 panels, so I moved to a second sketch in the lower part of the page with the 7 panel structure. So in the next page, you can see the 7 panel structures, and in the next one, the preliminary drawing. I like to work on blue pencil. It's digital, but I like to work on blue pencil to do the inking after. I can change something on the directly when inking. The main problem here was the central panel, because it was a view of Amsterdam. And as I said, I love to do it on the most realistic way possible. And this time I couldn't use pictures of Amsterdam of myself, but I have been really near in Belgium, in Bruges, and I'm not sure the other place. Well, anyway, 2 small towns in Belgium which has that same panorama of channels and architecture and all that. So I used 2 pictures. I put them together, and that's it, as you can see. And that's it, a view of Amsterdam, fake view of Amsterdam. So in the next page, we can see the inking. I take advantage at this stage to do some minor details that I cannot, or I don't want to draw by hand, like the bank bills, 500 euros on the second panel, and the last one with the bank statement. And in the next one, I add the colors in a separate layer, the plain colors. So I try to get sure that it works. For example, there is minor detail, but important for me, that it was reflecting the color of the sky in a town in northern Europe. That green gray, it's important to give the stem the appropriate ambient. Sorry for my English. I apologize. And in the next layer, I add the shadows, and I work on some small details that I should modify, but we are almost at the end. So the final step is adding the text with the balloons. In this case, there is only one in the 6th panel, and it's over. It's done.
Right, and what a beautiful sequence, and kind of brilliant that the one speech bubble is just the person saying, "What the hell?" This sort of the ubiquitous question when we're faced with something surprising. So you have another sequence to show us as well, I think, beginning with this script page.
Okay, yes, this one is more detailed because I followed the script directly. I changed the last 2 panels because one was settling a private house and the other in a cafe, and I switched them. But well, while reading the script, if you can go back, please. While reading the script, I love to do, just to warm the hand, I love to do that kind of drawings. You can see in the upper right side of the page. It was the second panel. I tried to do a sketch for the position of the character. So it's the same I use it in the next. That's it. So as we did before, this is the preliminary drawing. The central panels are inside the inside Mark's thoughts. So it will be not color, it will be grayscale. So, and the border of the panels will be different than the real life panels, could we say. So I added the text here because it's always a problem when you have a lot of text in a page, and just to be sure that text will fit into the scene without stepping on the drawings or not matching well on the whole panel. So this time it looks like it was working. I started the inking. Yes, indeed. You can move to the next, please. This is the final inking. As you see, I didn't draw the line for the central panels because, as I said, it will be thinking, so it must be different. So in the next one, I add the colors and I worked on the gray scale for the central panels. There is also some work of documentation here. it's another thing. I have a friend that told me, you work too much on documentation and people doesn't even notice. Well, maybe it's true, yes, but how is the uniform of some people in a combat in Middle East, or how is the uniform or the helmet of some people on a nuclear plant in a Middle East country. That kind of stupid things makes me lose a lot of time, but it's very funny to do that research. So after this, I add the shadows again, like we did in previous pages. And finally, the text with the balloons. Yes, that's it. And that's the final result.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. And, you know, it occurs to me, hearing you talk, what a connection there is between your effort to be historically accurate and the theme, you know, one of the big themes of the book, that journalism has this responsibility to get the facts right. So it's an amazing connection being exemplified in the art of cartooning. So thank you for that. How Ted and I were talking a little bit about this before you joined us, and I was saying that I had a feeling that because you are from Europe, you are bringing in another perspective into this sort of global story of what is happening to journalism. And yeah, I just wondered if you wanted to offer any perspective there. How you as a European view this narrative?
No, it's interesting because I think it's a global issue. I think in Europe, you know, we have also that kind of problems of fake or manufactured reality, manufactured news in order to move people towards an opinion, or they're having, even in my country of origin, in Spain, there have been complaints about Russian interferences in elections, and it's something crazy. And in journalism, I think this is a global problem. It's not only from journalists or in United States, but it's for the whole world, I think. And it's interesting what you said about giving about connecting the historic accurate with the journalism ethics. I truly didn't think about it, but it's true that I couldn't do it in any other way than trying to be realistic on what we are showing to match with the story that Ted wrote. And in fact, sometimes when I read the script, I was thinking, no, it is not possible that Ted has known or has lived a situation like this. But it's amazing how to try to match that and to give that realism, because I know it is perfectly possible that some situations that you read in the book and you say, no, this is absolutely not possible. And later, you think, yes, this could be possible because I have read or I have seen this other situation. It's really, really near to what Ted said here. Yeah.
Absolutely. Ted, you said earlier that when Pablo was explaining how he changed some of the panel structure, and you said, yeah, you didn't want to get in the way of that. Were there times when you were writing toward Pablo's strengths or visions? Did you, when you're writing a project that you're not going to draw, are you considering the artist and what might happen there?
To be honest, I think Pablo can do anything. So I don't think I never thought like, well, I don't know if he could do this or he could draw that or he could convey this. I mean, I think what helps is that, he's illustrating my script, but I think it helps that I'm a cartoonist too. And because I'm a cartoonist and I draw too, I know, like when he explained, for example, hey, listen, I can't show this in 4 panels. This has to be 7 or 9. I'm like, of course, I totally get that. First of all, he can just explain it to me and I'll get it. But I believe him. I just know, that like cartoonists know, one cartoonist to another. There's kind of like a total understanding. I mean, we both have met cartoonists from all over the world. And, there's just like, well, you can be from Bangladesh, but we're cartoonists. We kind of like, there's an international understanding of like sort of how to think in a certain way. And so I didn't, I wasn't worried about it. I thought, I knew from Year of Loving Dangerously that Pablo had this uncanny, we talked about this before you came on, Pablo, but you had this uncanny ability to like almost read my mind based on, I put a lot of details into the script, but I mean, still, Pablo has to make it visual. I mean, there's no way all the words, a picture is worth 20,000 words, right? And I'm not giving him 20,000 words. So it has to be, he has to have a sense of, of what's needed here. And so, I mean, yeah, I was never worried. It's like really, truly, I mean, there's, just like there's flashbacks. Like I know how he's going to convey that. It's like, it's just, he's a pro. He's the best. There's no reason.
Thank you. But I have to say, I must say that sometimes I do the changes without asking permission. Purte finds the final page completely finished, and it's like.
Well, you hear the confidence, and to tell the audience or to echo what you said earlier, Pablo, that because the 3 books that you've drawn that I know are this one, The Year of Loving Dangerously, and Bluesman. And to look at those 3 books is to see, wow, how the same artist will interpret 3 different scripts very, very differently. And that is a very joyful, again, an example of the greatness of the comic form. We have a perfect segue, and time-wise, we want to get to some audience questions, and there is one here that actually would sew up this conversation, this part of the conversation quite well, which is someone is asking, how each of you decide how much is going to go into a single panel, and how many of those panels are going to fit into a page. And even in the two sequences you showed, Pablo, they were diametrically opposite in terms of the text that needed to be there. So I agree. That's an interesting question. How to work that economy of language and visual art.
Well, maybe I should start that since it starts with the script, right? I think in the hands of a different team, this book could have been 600 pages. You know, we've read graphic novels where it literally a leaf takes 4 pages to fall off a tree. This is not that kind of book. I've always preferred to me, I view this as very cinematic, and I've always preferred movies that are taut. Like 1970s action thrillers like The Day of the Jackal or The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3, or The French Connection, where every scene moves the plot forward, is economical, is full of information, and there's no bullshit. And I think to my taste, a lot of graphic novels have a lot of extraneous atmospherics that might be appropriate for certain stories, but not this one. This is an international thriller. To me, this has the soundtrack of the Bourne Identity, right? So it's like it should move like that constantly. So that's how I wrote it. And Pablo, of course, take it from here.
No, yes, I agree totally. I totally agree. My visual and cultural education is basically in movies too. So I am always thinking in terms of movie, even for the composition of the panel. I'm always thinking in terms of movie screen, what I want to show in this one. So both for the aesthetic, we could say, or the look, and for the way of explaining the action. Yes, I find my inspiration on movies, and I work on that way too. Yeah.
Great. And someone else is asking if the book has been sold overseas yet, and I'll expand that a little bit too. Has there been any feedback or reception from readers overseas?
Well, we have a good lead on a French publisher. We'll see what happens there. We're shopping it around. That's a process that tends to take a little bit of time with any title. So certainly we hope to sell it all over. But the initial feedback from the French has been positive, I would say.
Yes, but it is a longer process than people could think. Yes, sometimes I am very surprised about how long the process could be.
Sure. Yes, and let's all say that it's long because publishing at its best works with care, and so taking its time has good results. I'm going to end our audience Q&A with this one, and it's a big one, but certainly rising to the big ideas that are in the book. How can the world move to public ownership of the media?
Well, there would be, I think, a need. I'm not sure it can, because in a capitalist system, most of the sort of representative democracies like the U.S. and the European countries have kind of they've kind of assumed private ownership of the media and written protections for owners of media outlets, like the First Amendment in the United States, in order to protect private enterprises, right? The idea of publicly owned or government subsidized outlets has never really taken root, especially in the US. I mean, we have Voice of America, but even though it is a reputable outlet, the truth is most Americans view it as just sort of anti-Russian propaganda from the Cold War. And but obviously there's the BBC, there's The French have state-owned television. It's all over the world. The Canadians do, and so it can be done. But I don't think, as long as we have capitalist economies, that it's going to really take root. I think that the closest we could get to is sort of journalism that is crowdfunded by individuals. I think that's probably the most likely solution, but certainly the current model is not working.
Right.
In Europe, we are a bit ahead. I'm sorry, I hit myself.
That's okay. Go ahead.
Okay. I said in Europe we are a bit ahead on that because in every country, almost every country, there are TV and radio stations, public, financed by the government. So they are. There is always some small problem of, okay, you are transmitting the ideas of the government, but in terms of culture, contents, and independence, and all that, it's a good model. They are often they offer a higher quality than the private companies in terms of culture content, music, literature. You cannot find that kind of programs in private TV or radio stations. Not for printed media, but for audiovisual media, there are public-owned companies that works really fine.
Thank you for that. Yes. Well, and thank you both for making this work of fiction that addresses so many important real-world topics at the moment. Before we leave, I want to thank everyone watching for giving due consideration to purchasing a book and to purchasing it at an event. When you do that, you support everyone who is involved, the authors of the book, their publisher, us who are the event host, and in this case, a great independent bookstore based here on the ground and in our community. And I stress that point because this Saturday is Independent Bookstore Day in America, a national celebration that didn't happen last year, of course. If you're watching today from anywhere in the Twin Cities, we are producing a independent bookstore passport for the bookstores of the Twin Cities, and Rain Taxi has created that in partnership with sponsors such as Coffee House, Grey Wolf, Milkweed, Mizna, and Free Spirit Publishing, along with many others. So I hope you'll take a peek at the info on our website if you can get out there and visit some bookstores. And if you're farther away, there's probably an independent bookstore near you that would welcome you. I want to thank our two guests. You've been spectacular, and thank everyone for watching this conversation. Have a great day. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.